And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy Monday. In Watergate, it's still not totally clear looking back why the Nixon White House didn't just destroy all the Oval Office tapes. I mean, they knew what was on them, right? Why didn't they just barbecue them? Frankly, looking back, it's still not clear why they made those tapes in the first place, but they made them. And by the time the special prosecutor was closing in Watergate, Nixon and his White House knew that if those tapes ever became public, that would be the end. So they fought to keep the tapes secret, the existence of the tape secret. Then once the public knew that they existed, they fought for the right to keep them private and never release them. Ultimately, the Nixon White House came up with a ridiculous offer that would make it look like they were releasing the tapes without them ever actually having to do so. We've talked about this on the show before. It was called the Stennis Compromise. To avoid releasing the tapes, Nixon offered the special prosecutor in Watergate a deal. The White House would not hand over the tapes, but they would listen to the tapes themselves, type up written summaries of what they said was on the tapes, and then they would cross your heart, pinky swear that those summaries were absolutely accurate and there was nothing else damning on the tapes at all. And just in case you were some sort of cold-hearted, cynical jerk and you wouldn't take President Nixon's word for it, that those written summaries were an accurate description of what was on the tapes, well, for you cynics, there would also be a verification process. A pro-Nixon Dixiecrat senator named Senator John Stennis would personally, individually listen to the tapes. He'd compare the tapes with the written summaries that had been drawn up by the Nixon White House, and Senator Stennis would personally sign off, attributing, right? He would listen to him. You could use his own integrity to tell whether those written summaries were accurate. He would attest to their accuracy. And that was an absolutely ridiculous offer from the Nixon White House, right? Not only was it a Rube Goldberg contraption, right, of the tapes being made and then the tapes being played and then transcribed and then summarized and then listened to again and then verified and signed off on by this other dude. But in addition to all of that, Senator John Stennis, the key validator for this whole process, he was famously deaf. So he was not going to be able to validate the auditory accuracy of any of those tapes. So the Stennis Compromise was offered. The special prosecutor said, yeah, no. And Nixon responded by firing the special prosecutor. That was the Saturday Night Massacre. He couldn't fire the special prosecutor directly, so he ordered his attorney general to fire the prosecutor. Attorney general said no, so he fired his attorney general. Then he gave the same order to the deputy attorney general, who said no. He fired the deputy attorney general. Ultimately, it was the solicitor general, Robert Bork, who said, yeah, okay, I will fire the special prosecutor. Now, as ridiculous as it is in hindsight, Nixon apparently really believed his own sales pitch. He really believed that this Stennis Compromise was such a reasonable, generous offer from him that the country would absolutely be on his side in this standoff. Look what I've offered. How can they say no to that? That is not how the country received it. Instead, the Saturday Night Massacre got the whole country up in arms. The whole thing really just blew up, both sides of the aisle. Ultimately, a new special prosecutor was appointed. And that was all she wrote for the Nixon administration. The new special prosecutor maintained the insistence on getting the actual tapes. The courts agreed. Nixon had to hand them over, and that was the end. In the Washington Post tonight, reporter Carol Lennig has a scoop that President Trump's lawyers in the Russia investigation have just sent over to special counsel Robert Mueller's office some written summaries of their own. Quote, President Trump's attorneys have provided the special counsel's office with written descriptions that chronicle key moments under investigation by the special counsel. Quote, the written materials provided to Mueller's office include summaries of internal White House memos and contemporaneous correspondence about events Mueller is investigating, including the ousters of National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and FBI Director James Comey. Quote, the records do not include Trump's personal version of events, but they provide a narrative of the White House view. Trump's lawyers hope this evidence eliminates the need to ask the president about some of these episodes. Raise your hand if you think this is going to make this whole problem for the White House go away. Raise your hand if you think Robert Mueller and his prosecutors will not just be delighted, they'll be absolutely satisfied to receive written narrative vignettes from the White House Russia lawyers providing their perspective on these matters that are under investigation. I mean, give them credit. How many other options do they have? The reason the president's lawyers are trying to do this is obvious to the point of being emphatic. As Carol Leonnig puts it in her scoop tonight at the Post, quote, Trump's legal team shared the documents in an effort to limit any session between the president and the special counsel. The decision to share materials with Mueller's team is part of an effort by Trump's lawyers to minimize his exposure to the special counsel. This latest gambit to write some stuff up for the special counsel's prosecutors is, quote, in hopes of curtailing the scope of a presidential interview. I bet. The president's lawyers are clearly paddling as fast as they can here, but they're only going to be able to steer this thing for so long. You will recall that the president's lawyers previously assured him that the Mueller investigation would be wrapped up by Thanksgiving, as in Thanksgiving last year. When we rolled straight through Thanksgiving, and that wasn't true, they apparently told him it would definitely be done by Christmas. Then they told him it would be done by the New Year, when that didn't happen either. January 8th is when the president's lawyers first floated the idea that instead of the president answering questions from special counsel Mueller, instead the president would just sign an affidavit affirming that he is innocent of all charges. See, the legal force of that would be that he would sign it. He'd put his name on it, so therefore that's all you need, right? That's an assurance of innocence. The president's lawyers suggested this sworn affidavit from the president asserting his innocence should be enough to satisfy the special counsel. If that wouldn't be satisfying enough, they also suggested, well, how about the special counsel could submit questions in writing, and then the president's lawyers could write up some answers and send those back? That, unsurprisingly, also did not make the special counsel go away. Just a week and a half ago, they came up with yet another gambit. They offered to have the president do a very limited interview with Mueller's team where he wouldn't have to answer any detailed questions at all. He could just speak to any general questions they might have. Okay. And in exchange for that generous offer from the president's lawyers, the special counsel would agree, for his part, that he would give up the whole thing in 60 days. He'd end the whole investigation within 60 days. So that gambit a week and a half ago, that apparently did not go anywhere either. So now, tonight, the president's lawyers have apparently tried this written vignette gambit. We'll see how that goes. It does seem like they're sort of running out of options and ridiculous compromises to offer. One House advisor concedes to Carol Leonnig tonight at the Washington Post that the Trump lawyers believe they are moving into crunch time on the Mueller investigation. Last week, the New York Times reported that the Trump organization, President Trump's business, has received a subpoena from the Mueller investigation. The president himself has already betrayed to reporters that he would, that this is a sensitive subject for him. He had previously said to the Times that any investigation into his business and his business finances is something he would see as a violation by the special counsel. We also now know that Mueller's investigators have sent to the president's Russia lawyers the first round of topics and questions they intend to discuss with the president in his interview. And, you know, maybe the president's lawyers are right, and Mueller's prosecutors will be fully satisfied with just getting written descriptions of events from the perspective of White House lawyers in response to those queries. But that would be a surprise if they were okay with that. Last week, the New York Times was also first to report that a new lawyer would be joining the president's roster in the Russia scandal at this late date. The Times reported that veteran Washington lawyer Emmett T. Flood was in discussions to join the president's team. The president himself vehemently denied that report, saying not just that he wasn't hiring Emmett T. Flood, but that he wasn't hiring anybody. The president said, quote, "The failing New York Times purposely wrote a false story stating that I'm unhappy with my legal team on the Russia case and I'm going to add another lawyer to help out. Wrong. I am very happy with my lawyers, John Dowd, Ty Cobb, and Jay Sekula. They're doing a great job." The failing New York Times, wrong to report that I want a new lawyer for my Russia team. Today, the White House confirmed that, in fact, the president is adding a new lawyer to his Russia team. We're going to actually have a little more on him coming up later on in the show tonight. So this does sort of feel like crunch time. At least it feels like a lot of cages are being rattled all at once. I mean, the president last week fired Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and coincidentally or not, that firing came Tuesday morning, just hours after Tillerson made his first ever sharply critical comments about Russia. The White House has pushed a false timeline of Tillerson's firing to make it appear that he was fired sometime before his Russia comments, going so far as to also fire the number 4 official at the State Department, who put out an accurate statement about when, in fact, Tillerson was fired, which was hours after his Russia remarks. CNN also reports that embassies around the world and other State Department officials were ordered explicitly to not retweet or acknowledge that true statement about when exactly Tillerson was fired. So something's rattled them there. Then late on Friday night, just after I got off the air, like 30 seconds after I got off the air, the deputy director of the FBI was fired, Andrew McCabe. Now, if there was any doubt as to whether that firing was related to the Russia scandal, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, cleared that up the following morning, Saturday morning, when he released a statement to the Daily Beast saying that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein should follow the example set by the McCabe firing, and he should, quote, bring an end to the alleged Russia collusion investigation. So McCabe's own statement about his firing on Friday night certainly contended that this is related to Russia. He contends in this lengthy statement that he issued Friday night that his ouster is an effort to discredit him as a witness to the firing of FBI Director James Comey, which all sides agree is one of the key areas of focus and investigation by Mueller's team. So, I mean, it does sort of feel like we're in crunch time. It feels like the White House is rattled, and it feels like they're taking increasingly erratic action. And now, in the midst of all that, the president's lawyers and Mueller's lawyers going head-to-head, the firings, and in at least one of those cases, a false cover story about the firing being advanced by the White House, this hard turn by the president and his lead Russia lawyer this weekend to start attacking Robert Mueller and the special counsel's office directly. In the cacophony of this crunch time, now, today, there is a new thing that is going crunch.
What we want to know is what is the expertise of the deep digging that you can do to make sure that the people know the true identity and secrets of these people.
We do a lot more than that. I mean, deep digging is interesting, but equally effective can be just to go and speak to the incumbents and to offer them a deal that's too good to be true, and make sure that that's video recorded. These sorts of tactics are very effective. Instantly having video evidence of corruption, putting it on the internet, these sorts of things.
And the operative you will use for this is who?
Well, someone known to us.
Okay, so it is somebody. You won't use a Sri Lankan person, no? Because then there's issue.
We'll have a wealthy developer come in, somebody posing as a wealthy developer.
I'm a master of disguise.
Yes. They will offer a large amount of money to the candidate to finance his campaign in exchange for land, for instance. We'll have the whole thing recorded on cameras. We'll blank out the face of our guy, and we'll have posted on the internet.
So it'll on the Facebook or YouTube or something like this. It can be done.
We'll send some girls around to the candidate's house. We have lots of history of things.
For example, you're saying when you're using the girls to introduce to the local fellow, and you're using the girls for this, like the seduction, they're not local girls, not Sri Lankan girls.
I wouldn't have thought so. We could bring some. I mean, that was just an idea.
Yes.
We could bring some Ukrainians in on holiday with us.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. They are very beautiful Ukrainian girls.
They are very beautiful.
Yes.
I find that works very well.
They are very beautiful. I find the Ukrainian girls trick works very, very well. The English gentleman who was on the right side of your screen for most of that tape, explaining that tactic, is the CEO of Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica is famous for being the data firm for the Trump campaign. They're basically a British firm that opened up a U.S. shell company with money from Republican mega donor Robert Mercer. One of the easiest things to forget about the presidential election cycle is who was affiliated with who before Trump started winning everything. In this past presidential election cycle, Robert Mercer and his web of companies and donations, they didn't initially support Trump. He initially supported Ted Cruz in the primary. That's why there are those funny clips you can still get on YouTube of Kellyanne Conway criticizing Donald Trump in the 2016 election race. That's because Kellyanne Conway was associated with the Mercer family and their web of entities and donations, and they initially were not for Trump. They were for Ted Cruz. When it became clear, though, that Ted Cruz was going to lose to Donald Trump, the whole Mercer operation switched allegiance. This happened around the time when it came time for Paul Manafort to fade back into the background because of his shady-seeming relationships with pro-Russian oligarchs and political factions in the former Soviet Union. At that time, you know, Ted Cruz took his fight all the way to the convention, but then Trump was triumphant. Manafort gets ousted. The Mercers stepped into the Trump campaign. They installed Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon at the top of the Trump campaign. They also brought on board Cambridge Analytica, which the Mercers funded, which Steve Bannon helped found, and where he served as vice president. It's interesting, though. Just a few months before all that happened, in December 2015, the Guardian newspaper in Britain had reported that Cambridge Analytica's work for the Ted Cruz campaign appeared to have something sort of rotten at the center of it. Cambridge Analytica was supporting Ted Cruz, and they appeared to be using millions of Facebook profiles that had effectively been stolen off of Facebook without the user's consent. It was a sort of minor, slightly arcane campaign controversy at the time. Facebook apparently wasn't too bothered by that reporting or its implications. They took quite a few months until late 2016 before they apparently even bothered anybody about it. A new whistleblower, who's the former research director at Cambridge Analytica, he's now come forward to the New York Times, to the Guardian and Observer newspapers in Britain, and to Britain's Channel 4, saying that he was contacted in August 2016, so right before the 2016 election, contacted August 2016 by Facebook when they sent him a notification telling him that he and Cambridge Analytica needed to delete all that data. He and other Cambridge Analytica sources now say that Cambridge Analytica didn't delete that data, and it didn't much matter because Facebook never checked to see if they did.
What Cambridge Analytica does is works on creating a web of disinformation online so that people start going down the rabbit hole of clicking on blogs, websites, etc., that make them think that certain things are happening that may not be. Cambridge Analytica was meeting with Corey Lewandowski in 2015 before Trump had even announced, and offering the services that I'm talking about right now. Cambridge Analytica was founded on misappropriated data of at least 50 million Facebook users. And I want to bring attention to that so that people understand that their data is being used improperly by this company that has also been, in talks with Russian oil companies, that was using a psychologist who was going back and forth between London and Russia, who was also working on projects that were funded by Russian funds in Russia on profiling people and their personalities. So I think it's really important for Americans to know what this company has been doing with their data, and it's really important, I think, to find out, was this data used to help elect Donald Trump?
That's the former research director at Cambridge Analytica. His name is Chris Wiley, speaking on the Today Show this morning. He made a reference there to a Russian oil company. That's about this company, Lukoil. They're the second largest oil company in Russia. They have turned up in the past in Russian influence operations overseas. One famous example is in the Czech Republic. With a pro-Russian president in the Czech Republic, a key advisor to that pro-Russian president found himself in financial trouble because of a legal matter, and this random Russian oil company, Lukoil, stepped in to rescue him, basically, to pay his legal fees. So Lukoil is a private company, but it has been deployed as an instrument of the Kremlin, and they are sanctioned by U.S. law because of it. One of the things that Cambridge Analytica's former research director, Christopher Wiley, is saying and providing documentation of now is that he says in 2014 and 2015, Cambridge Analytica met with executives from Lukoil, specifically to give them detailed briefings on how data was used to target American voters. Quote, Christopher Wiley, who helped found Cambridge Analytica and develop the company's voter profiling technology, said Lukoil showed interest in how the company used data to target their messaging to American voters. Quote, I remember being super confused, said Mr. Wiley, who took part in one of the Lukoil meetings. I kept asking Alexander Nix, the head of Cambridge Analytica, can you explain to me what they want? I don't understand why Lukoil wants to know about political targeting in America. We're sending them stuff about political targeting. They come and ask more about political targeting. as to the way that Cambridge Analytica got access to their core data, to the personal and private data of at least 50 million Facebook users, which is what this whistleblower says their whole political operation was based on. Well, according to the Guardian and Observer, they obtained that information by partnering with a professor at Cambridge University in England. He was able to obtain that kind of data from Facebook, supposedly for academic purposes, but he then apparently made a business deal with Cambridge Analytica where he handed it on to them for them to use it in their business. According to the Guardian, quote, while that professor was helping turn Facebook profiles into a political tool, he was also an associate professor at St. Petersburg State University in Russia, taking Russian government grants to fund other research into social media. Online posts showed Professor Kogan lecturing in Russian. One talk was called New Methods of Communication as an Effective Political Instrument. So, Cambridge Analytica does presentations in 2014 and 2015 for a Russian oil company that has been known to do political work for the Kremlin around the world. They give that oil company information about how to target and influence American voters and how that works. Why does a Russian oil company need that kind of information? We then learn that Cambridge Analytica obtains the core data that was the basis of their business and all their political work from a Russian researcher who was working at Cambridge, but is also simultaneously doing work for the Russian government. We know from separate reporting that during the campaign, while the Trump campaign was paying Cambridge Analytica nearly $6 million for its data services, Cambridge Analytica was in touch with WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was busy distributing emails that had been stolen by Russian government hackers to try to inflict maximum political harm on Hillary Clinton. Cambridge Analytica contacted them to see if they could basically help out with that. Well, now a whistleblower who's deeply involved in the data operations of that company has come forward and handed over to Britain's National Crime Agency Cybercrime Unit a dossier of emails, invoices, contracts, and bank transfers from his time at the company. He says he's basically driven by guilt. The British Prime Minister says she supports an investigation into the company. The Information Commissioner in the UK, which is sort of the prosecutor on privacy issues, says she is now seeking a warrant to get their databases and their servers. The European Union also says they are interested in starting an investigation here. At least one state attorney general, Democrat Maura Healey in Massachusetts, says she too is potentially looking at this as a criminal matter here in the United States. The president and his legal team have thus far come up with one legal argument to prove that there was no conspiracy or collaboration between the Russian effort to help elect Donald Trump and Donald Trump's campaign effort trying to do the same thing. So far, their legal argument is them saying in all capital letters with exclamation points on the end, no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. And I know it feels like everything is sort of happening all at once, but we are about to find out if that complex legal argument from them has met its match. Crunch time indeed. Senator Amy Klobuchar joins us next. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.